speaking of 50, that is about the number of points Nebraska football scored in its last 3 games. To help rectify that problem, they bring in Glenn Thomas, who was coaching the Steelers as recently as Monday, but Nebraska hired him away from there after the Steelers lost to the Bills. Evan, first of all, how long do you think the name Glenn Thomas, rather, was in the works for Nebraska, and what do you make of his journey to Lincoln?
Well, I think it's probably been out there for a while. I mean, we've talked about it on this show, I'm pretty sure, over the course of the last month, and some of that's just because of his connections with Rule. And, again, Matt Rule's been open during the season about the fact that his original vision for the staff when he assembled it a year ago was that Marcus Satterfield would call plays as the offensive coordinator and that they would have a different quarterbacks coach. And that didn't work out. And they made some moves with tight end, and then Bob Wager resigned in the fall and Josh Martin filled in. So a lot of the staff configuration didn't go exactly as they originally planned, but I think it was always sort of in their minds to dedicate somebody specifically to work with quarterbacks. And Glenn Thomas is certainly, that guy for Matt Rule. He joined up with him at Temple for the end of the PJ Walker era, and then was with him throughout his time at Baylor and worked with Charlie Brewer to some solid success. And so that's one thing we've seen a lot of with Matt Rule assembling his staff, is that he likes his guys that he's worked with before, that he's familiar with. Not always, but oftentimes. And so, Glenn Thomas is somebody who's got a track record of helping quarterbacks like Matt Ryan in the NFL, and he's coordinated offenses too. And I think the other interesting thing about Thomas as it relates to Nebraska is you don't expect there to be too much of a learning curve, because Matt Rule, Thomas, and Marcus Satterfield will all work together for 2 years at Baylor, figuring things out offensively, and that went pretty well. So, oftentimes when you bring in a new staffer, there's more of an onboarding process to this thing, and it really seems like they can hit the ground running as they start to work with Dylan Raiola and Daniel Kalin and Heinrich Harburg this season.
Another name that had been thrown out there for that position was Dana Holgorsen. I know there have been some reports that Nebraska is still talking to him, but Holgorsen, I think, would have come in and been at least co-offensive coordinator along with Marcus Satterfield. But Glenn Thomas is dedicated to quarterbacks. Now, obviously, he will have the ear of the coaches for game plans and be kind of that liaison between quarterback coach and coordinator for whoever it is that starts at quarterback for Nebraska. But do you think that this year will be maybe a truer evaluation of Marcus Satterfield as a play caller, given the stability he has in what role he's coaching, and probably, less turnover and more of a quarterback he's suited to work with than last year when it seemed like they were kind of piecing it together?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair. That's not to say that there weren't moments last season when there were play calls made late that maybe left you scratching your head a little bit, or at least open to second guessing. I think that's fair and part of it, but certainly, the players that they have, or they had last season, either weren't able to execute what they had, or they just weren't gifted in the way that they wanted to go with it. Like, you didn't imagine when Marcus Satterfield came in that Nebraska would need to be running option pitch plays the way that they did, and they adjusted, and you got to credit them for trying to win games in the moment. But contrast that with the defense, where you have a really strong sense of what Tony White was trying to do, and you have a really strong sense of how that defense is going to take a step forward next season. That wasn't the case on the offensive side, and some of that was quarterback play in general, with the 25 giveaways that they were directly responsible for. And so it's hard to put a letter grade on what the offense did because of factors like that. And so now you have a situation where you have a guy like Raiola who can come in, who's, even though he's a freshman, it looks like he can make all the throws, or a lot of the throws that you want. You have somebody else now dedicated to the quarterback spot. So if you're Satterfield, on game days, you can worry about calling the plays and communicating with the offense, and not needing necessarily to dial in specifically with the quarterbacks. So yeah, I think the support structure is set up now in such a way that you can have a better feel for evaluating what this offense can be. And I think it's better for Satterfield, and I think it's better for the players and the rest of the staff as well.
Evan, I was reading your write-up on Omaha.com. I'd like to direct people there for sure, too. But one of the things you mentioned about Glenn Thomas was that he was less about, this is what a quarterback looks like and more about adapting to the personnel. And I think that's going to serve him well at Nebraska, right? If you look at Raiola, pocket passer type, Daniel Kalen probably that way. But I don't say the other guy, the third guy in that room, the guy that was responsible, at least partly for Nebraska's 5 wins last year, starting quarterback was Heinrich Haarberg, who isn't at all like either of those guys, right? Maybe similar arm strength, but different in terms of a passer versus a runner. I've been on the train of Nebraska wants probably more of a pocket style quarterback for what Satterfield and Rule want to do. But with Glenn Thomas at quarterbacks coach, I think it's fair to say that Nebraska can go any direction and trust Glenn Thomas will work with that quarterback to try to get the best out of them, regardless of their skill set coming out of high school, right?
Yeah, I think so. And quite honestly, that's a contrast with the name that you mentioned earlier, Dana Holgerson, coming out of that Mike Leach tree, where it's like that's the system, more or less. That's what they would run under him if he had his druthers. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting going back. I went back and listened to Glenn Thomas's interview before he started with Arizona State. He was the offensive coordinator there a couple seasons ago. And he was asked about his offensive philosophy, and he kind of laid it out. He said a lot of pro style in the NFL when he was with the Falcons. Saw some different things at the college level, certainly with what Baylor ran and other places that he was at. And so he's like, yeah, I've kind of been with different kinds of quarterbacks, been in different kinds of offenses, and he just said, I feel comfortable adjusting to what we have, and you kind of figure that out, and then you go from there. And so I think that applies pretty well to what Nebraska has. To your point about Heinrich Haarberg and just the kind of offense that you would run with his skill set versus the kind of offense you would run with Dylan Raiola or possibly Daniel Kalen's skill set. Those are different things. And so the Haarberg situation will be fascinating, I think, moving forward, because he is the resident veteran in the room after starting 8 games last year. The staff already has showed an indication or a willingness to be creative with how they use him, given that he did catch a pass in that season opener at Minnesota. But at the same time, he's a guy who really only has like 1 year being developed as a quarterback. He really wasn't in those conversations a couple of years ago. So you would think that'd be a situation where you'd continue to see what he can offer in the spring. And then Matt Rule and company have already made it pretty clear that they're willing to tinker, move guys around positionally, out of season, in season, and quite oftentimes to some success. So we'll see how that goes. But you would think certainly the spring would be an opportunity for Glenn Thomas and Nebraska to see what they have in this group of quarterbacks.
We're talking with Evan Bland of the Omaha World-Herald here on our Allo VIP line. Let's go out west to Hawaii. The Polynesian Bowl. Nebraska has 3 players out there: Carter Nelson, Preston Taumua, and of course Dylan Raiola, who has been making some social media splashes with his 72-yard throw that won the long toss competition. Evan obviously hasn't played a snap at Nebraska, but based off of that video, I think it's fair to ask this question. Dylan Raiola seems to have the best arm of any Nebraska quarterback since who?
Boy. Well, I mean, it's been a while. He'll have it seems like the accuracy to go with that, and the quick release and all the rest. I don't know. That's a good question. You probably do have to go pretty far back. And, I remember watching Jamal Lord back in the day, and the old joke was like the only one who could overthrow a dictator was Jamal Lord, because he would, overthrow on some of these bombs back in the early 2000s. So that's the one that just kind of comes to mind for me, but I don't know if he could go 70 yards the way that Dylan Raiola can. So
Tommy Armstrong, maybe?
Maybe Tommy Armstrong. That could be. That's possible. And if you're a Nebraska receiver, are you not salivating a little bit at that right now, and making sure your hamstrings are loose and not letting up at the end of your route, knowing that your quarterback could maybe get that thing 70 yards downfield and maybe more than that if the wind's howling in the right direction for you at Memorial Stadium. So I think it was just a reminder overall that, like, the guy who's your potential starter next year does have a different skill set than what we've seen at Nebraska in a while. And he's not going to be a guy, I don't think, who's going to be asked to scramble or move much with his legs, even though I think he's capable of that. You're going to see a lot of different sort of things coming from him because of these abilities. So, the jokes about Nebraska winning the off season and the Rule Aid and all that, it doesn't go away when you see a throw like that Raiola made out in Hawaii. But pretty cool deal, and just a reminder again of just the upside that he brings to Lincoln here pretty soon.
I think, Malachi Coleman, Isaiah Nayor, Jalen Lloyd, all those guys are certainly licking their chops with a quarterback like that. But Evan, is there any hesitancy in that too, that Nebraska might get too carried away with the deep ball and the shiny toy to go away from the run game that Matt Rule said he wants to dominate the fourth quarters?
When you have a guy like that makes your running game all the more respected, does it not? I mean, that was kind of the problem. One of the problems for Nebraska's offense last year was teams pretty much dared Nebraska to beat them through the air. So, we're going to stack the box and, try to make a play over top of us. And if you do, great, but we're not counting on that. Fans aren't the only people seeing what Dylan Raiola is doing out in Hawaii. If you're a Big Ten defensive coordinator and the guy lining up against you this September, October can throw it 70 yards, maybe you're not quite so eager to put 8 or 9 in the box and bring your safeties down and things like that. So I think just the mere threat of the deep ball can actually open up the run game. You look at some of his huddle film. I think we'll probably see this Friday night when he plays in the Polynesian Bowl. It's not like it's boom ball or Hail Mary time every time. I think you're going to see him with an ability to put touch on balls. You're going to see him be able to have depth to his throws. I've heard that from a couple of receivers that have had workouts with him. Is he's not just gunning it in there. I mean, he can hit you in the back shoulder, over the top. He can put some touch on it and do different things too. So the deep ball is certainly one of those tools. And ultimately, again, if you have a guy who's that versatile and who can be proven to beat you through the air, I actually think that'll open up what Nebraska wants to do on the ground game. Now, if you're Marcus Satterfield and you see that, I think maybe that's the question, is like, do you kind of get a sweet tooth for that sort of thing? And maybe want to go back to that instead of pounding the ball in the fourth. But, if it gets to that point, that's probably a good problem to have if you're Nebraska.
That's definitely fair to say. The other aspect of Dylan Raiola's arm strength I want to touch on here is, yes, the deep ball that we just talked about, but Matt Rule's mentioned this. I don't know if it's gone, as noticed or as publicized, was just the ability to, cut through the cold Big Ten temperatures, the wind, the precipitation that might be coming down. It seems like, those 3rd and 7 pluses have felt like an adventure. And, heaven forbid Nebraska be behind the sticks at like 3rd and 14 and 15. It would feel like, a miracle for Nebraska to convert some of those. But the best quarterbacks, Evan, I think, have those intermediate throws and those clutch throws in their bag. And that's where I think Dylan Raiola is not just arm strength, but touch is more than just the deep ball.
Yeah, agreed. The spin, you hear that a lot. Just you have a tight spiral, you're able to cut through the elements and, get the ball where you want it to be. So I think, that's important. It's interesting. You think about Matt Rule, and he's done deep dives on like, how do you win at Nebraska versus, say, at Baylor or at Temple? And a big part of what he's talked about has been those elements and the wind in particular. Like, it gets cold in a lot of places, and it can rain or wherever, but like most of the time you're going to see some funky wind inside Memorial Stadium. You can look at the flags on top of the uprights, and oftentimes they're swirling. You've heard many kickers, home and away, over the years saying it's a difficult place to kick. And I think in some ways, for that reason, it's a difficult place to pass the ball too. And you've seen instances where balls do kind of die in the wind, or they get pushed downfield, or there's sort of a cross breeze or whatever. Raiola, in a lot of ways, is suited to be a quarterback at Nebraska because of all that, where the wind maybe does play less of a factor. And overall, you still don't want to be throwing the ball 50 times a game. You want to pound the ground game and lean on the line of scrimmage and be that team. But when you do pass it, the most effective way to do it is to do it with a guy like Raiola, with the arm strength that he has, the spin, the accuracy, and all the rest. So it'll be really fascinating to see how that translates to Nebraska and where they go from here. But it seems like he's got all the tools in the tool belt to come in and be effective pretty early.
Let me ask you one special teams question too here before I let you go, Evan. Dylan Raiola coming in as a true freshman quarterback seems like it'd be most people's bet to be the starter, but Tristan Alvano was the starting kicker for Nebraska last year. Strick and I were kind of talking about this, the differences between Nebraska and Iowa. Like, we come back to special teams, right? Iowa's defense, one of the best in the country. Nebraska's much improved, both offenses, in the mid 100s in a lot of rankings, but Iowa's special teams remained elite. When you look at Tristan Alvano and Brian Buschini, what are your expectations for them with another year under their belt at Nebraska?
Better, certainly. I think Alvano, you could kind of see it toward the end where he was able to settle in and be what he can be. I would expect him to have a pretty big second season as he settles into college life. And there's really no obvious challenger to him on the roster. Buschini, lives and breathes punting. Like, you can bet that he was as disappointed as anybody in his overall numbers this past year. Like, he just loves it and dives into it and tries to be a master of his craft. And so I don't have any question that he's going to put in the work this off season to be that guy moving forward. But if it's not him, Sam Cook's son coming in as a walk-on is a fascinating prospect early on. So maybe having somebody else in that room to challenge Buschini can make a difference. And for what it's worth, I mean, Buschini has been the guy since he's been at Nebraska. There really hasn't been sort of that number two challenger for him. So, specialists do tend to be spots where, if guys have shown potential, that they tend to build on that potential. And so I would imagine, again, they both have sort of the head spaces that would suggest that they're going to be good. And I think that is something you look at with specialists more than most spots. You kind of liken it to golf, right? Like, you want a golfer with a short memory and somebody who doesn't worry if they shank it once, you're on to that next one. And I think that's something that in my talks with Alvano and Buschini, they both have, is that short memory, the confidence in what they do. They think about kind of their approach, but they don't overthink it. And their personalities, I think, are both as such to where they enjoy it without maybe putting too much pressure on themselves. So I'm certainly not saying they're going to live up to what Iowa's done in special teams, but I do think as you look at Nebraska's potential rise in the future, everyone's going to point to that offense and just what Nebraska can do if they're league average. But I think special teams too is another area where there's absolutely room for improvement. If you can increase that net punting average by 3 or 4 yards, or increase that field goal accuracy by 2 or 3 more, in a lot of close games, that can make a difference. So certainly an area of potential growth for Nebraska.
Okay, I lied one more. Isaiah Nayor, is he going to Trey Palmer his way out of return considerations, or do you think he can be a factor in punt and kick return?
Yeah, I like Trey Palmer as a verb. That's good. Maybe, yeah. I mean, he's got that speed. He was the big play receiver in college football a couple of years ago at Wyoming. So yeah, I mean, if you can be the guy who's busting loose for a long touchdown reception every game and some other chunk gains here or there, then yeah, I think you probably have earned yourself as sort of an exclusive role on the offense there. But that's another area where we talk about special teams too, where, man, I mean, Nebraska just has not moved the needle at all in the return game, both punts or kickoffs, for a long time, since J.D. Spielman was here. DeMarne Pearsonell. I mean, you're talking 6 years ago since they've really done anything of note in that phase of the game. So, again, if Nebraska has more of the receiver depth that they think that they have now, and that maybe it appears that they do, then anybody you put back there that can be a spark in that phase of the game would hold a lot of value. But my guess would be Nayor would come in, and if he feels like he can make a difference in either of those spots, settle in, because that kind of production would be welcome.
Evan, as always, appreciate the time. Stay warm. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. See ya.